Later on today, we're going to be seeing Congress returning from their summer recess. We're going to be joined now by Fox 5's Melanie Allwig, who's live for us down in D.C. Melanie, what can we expect?
Yeah, a number of things on the table for Congress as they return, but certainly here in the District of Columbia and the larger metropolitan region, everybody is thinking and talking about the federalization of the district police department and the federal surge here. We know that there are Republican bills in Congress that would allow this to continue, some for an extension of up to 180 days, some an indefinite extension. We know that Democrats also trying to introduce their own legislation to regain some control over the D.C. National Guard, and this comes as the president has signaled that he would like his surge to keep going, even posting on social media Monday praising D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser for working with him, quote, in bringing crime down to virtually nothing in D.C. Trump issued 2 executive orders on August 11th, one to deploy the National Guard, which states that that would remain in effect until President Trump determines that conditions of law and order have been restored. The other to bring the D.C. police department under federal control, and under that specific order, that would expire next week unless Congress votes to extend it. The U.S. Attorney for D.C., Jeanine Pirro, tells Fox News Sunday there's more work to do in her opinion, while one of D.C. council members, Robert White, has been an outspoken critic of this effort, and he says he never believed the White House intended to make this last only 30 days.
I don't think the president ever anticipated this ending. I don't think that's part of his plan. There are multiple ways that he could extend this through Congress and unfortunately without Congress.
Who is the person who says, you know, crime is low enough for us to handle? Who decides what is acceptable? If we go from intolerable to unacceptable, does that mean we should pat ourselves on the back and say, let's just leave town?
Well, we do know that the task force press office keeps talking about their successes, and we have heard that combined federal agencies and D.C. police have made almost 1,600 arrests and seized more than 156 illegal guns since the deployment began. The president calling D.C. now a virtual crime-free zone. Now, we do know that even if these bills pass the Senate, they do face a potential block in the form of a filibuster in the Senate. So we don't know when these bills yet are coming up for hearings, but we do know that they've been introduced here in Congress, and everyone is going to be paying attention because we only have about 1 week left in this legally allowed takeover, and we'll have to see what happens after that.
Right, Fox 5's Melanie Allwig, thank you so much for joining us live down there in D.C. Lots to keep up with. I hope you have a good rest of your day. I'm going to take us back out live to this image that we have over at the Capitol building as we continue to follow all of this, all of the headlines coming out of the nation's capital here in the U.S. But first, we're going to step away for a quick commercial break, continuing our coverage after this. Continuing to follow all of the latest headlines coming out of Washington, D.C., Reuters here posting to X, the U.S. Congress returns on Tuesday, that's today, with less than a month left to perform one of its core functions, keeping federal agencies funded and averting a partial government shutdown, a job that it has struggled to perform in recent years. Joining us now to give us a recap of what happened during the first half of this session, but also what's to come, is political analyst and historian Rich Rubino. Rich, good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
So, Rich, I know that it's football season, but I like to call this Rich Rubino season because Congress is coming back today. We're having some hearings with both the House and the Senate. But let's start with the basics because a lot happened before the summer recess. So get us up to speed.
Well, a couple of things. I think the flagship issue and the main, accomplishment on behalf of Donald Trump in terms of getting through the United States Congress was the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. While it may be unpopular amongst the population, it was certainly popular among Republicans. Trump had to get the support of almost every Republican in the United States Congress, and in the House of Representatives anyways. He got the support of pretty much every member except for Tom Massey, who's kind of more of a libertarian conservative, and Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, who's more of a moderate Republican from Pennsylvania. But basically, he got every member of the House of Representatives to vote for that legislation. You'll now see that a lot of the House members who represent marginal districts, the act will be used against them in many political advertising. I think the Democrats really kind of smell political blood, if you will, because the act is unpopular. It's Donald Trump's job, I think, to try to sell the act and to try to make it popular. I think Mike Lawler from New York, who's one of the 3 members of the House of Representatives who represent congressional districts that went for Vice President Harris, but who's a Republican, he's basically doubling down and saying there's good things in this legislation. So we'll see how his strategy works. But that was the main thing. Beyond that, I think it was certainly the government averting a shutdown, and they did that in part with Democrat votes, including Chuck Schumer, the minority leader from New York, and that really drowned a lot of his popularity in the Democratic caucus and the Democratic in the Democratic Party in general. I think that many Democrats want the party to kind of stand firm against Donald Trump, and he did not necessarily do that in terms of the budget.
So this partial government shutdown looming is one of the major headlines that have been following throughout the last few days leading up to Congress returning today. Is that going to be the main focal point for this month of September?
Yes, I think it is. I think they need to get a budget for fiscal year 2026. That means that they need to get essentially 12 appropriations bills passed. What they could do if they don't reach an agreement by October 1st, which seems likely, is they could pass continuing resolutions. A continuing resolution basically funds the government at the current levels until they can negotiate a settlement, but that's probably what's going to happen. In this case, the Democrats have some of the cards, unlike in the big, beautiful bill, which could pass with only 50 votes. The Democrats can invoke cloture, meaning that essentially you need 60 in order for the government to continue to be funded in 2026. You really need 60 votes, not 50 votes. So the Democrats have a few trump cards, if you will, to play here.
When we talk about these government shutdowns, can you just remind our viewers what kind of direct impact this would have for the average American?
Well, they're partial government shutdowns. They're not actual government shutdowns. Some of the basic services of the government, for example, the military does not stop, for example, but some things do halt. For example, much of what the National Park Service does. There's kind of a pick and choose, if you will, of what the government believes are required functions and those that they believe are optional functions. So a lot of the government programs will at least be halted until they can negotiate some sort of an agreement to bring the government back. We've had this before. We've had this certainly with Donald Trump in 2018. We had this with Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich a few times. So we've had this with Ronald Reagan. We've had this with Gerald Ford. We've had this with Jimmy Carter. We've had this before. But basically, certain functions that they believe are not what's called "quote unquote" non-essential are usually halted. But while they're negotiating an agreement, and the major functions like the Department of Defense, for example, are usually continued.
I want to take this post on X from Bloomberg government saying that Congress has less than a month to strike a bipartisan funding deal and avoid an October 1st shutdown, a task complicated by the increasing animosity between the White House and Capitol Hill. Much to your point there, Rich. But this partial government shutdown that's looming, certainly not the only thing that Congress is going to be focused on heading into this latter half of the year. What else are they going to really hone in on?
Well, one thing that's getting a little bit of bipartisan support against the Trump administration is actually ordering the Department of Justice to release the Jeffrey Epstein files. Currently, all 212 Democrats who are in the chamber have signed on to what's called a discharge petition, as have 12 Republicans. Now, what's a discharge petition? Well, a discharge petition basically says that if a majority of the House of Representatives basically vote to call up a piece of legislation without the speaker having any control over it whatsoever, the legislation will be taken up immediately in the House of Representatives. So currently there's a bipartisan Ro Khanna, congressman from California, many think he may run for president someday, on the left, and Tom Massey, the aforementioned Tom Massey, a libertarian conservative on the right, have basically assembled a coalition of 212 Democrats and 12 Republicans. So theoretically, they can make it so that it would null and void anything that Michael Johnson says, that he says other pieces of legislation should be in the hopper, should be taken up first. This would be taken up essentially right away, and that would release the Epstein papers, which is something that would really be just the chagrin of the Trump administration. Michael Johnson's really has to thread a needle here. This is where he's a little bit different than Donald Trump, because he had suggested publicly that he thinks the Epstein files should be released whereas Donald Trump has basically said that there's nothing in them and that the American people have kind of forgotten about them. So this is really where Michael Johnson threads the needle.
Taking us back out to this image that we have over at the Capitol building. Rich, I mean, there's so much to talk about, including these Senate nominations. I mean, the fighting still continues there. Stiffer sanctions against Russia. The Senate panel awaiting RFK Jr. and his appearance. That Epstein files list that you just mentioned. The GOP also focusing on Biden's mental fitness in office. I mean, is this a pretty normal to see? I mean, such a hefty list of issues to focus on. And we're already heading into, well, we're in September. I mean, we're more than halfway through the year.
Yes, there are oftentimes a litany of issues. Sometimes there are issues that the House and the Senate debate and take up. Sometimes they never go anywhere. There's a lot of legislation that you never hear about. One individual House member can basically author any piece of legislation, it goes into a proverbial hopper, if you will, and the speaker may never actually go to a committee, or it may go to a committee. The committee may table it. So there's a lot of legislation to which that happens. But this is obviously this is a huge turn of events which is going on this time. But I think that the budget is something that goes up every year, and because we're in such a bifurcated, divisive time right now, if you will, you're going to see many scenarios where the Congress cannot necessarily agree to a budget. You may say, well, we have Republicans control the House, Republicans control the Senate. That means that that budget should go through pretty easily and go right to the president's desk. But in actuality, the Senate, you need 60 votes. Because of the filibuster to get a federal budget passed, and that's very hard for Donald Trump to do because he only has 53 Republicans, so he has to have all 53 Republicans in check, and that means someone like Susan Collins, who's the chairman of the Appropriations Committee and is up for re-election, a very tough state of Maine that voted very handily for Vice President Harris last time. So it's in her political interest to oppose the president, and then you have just a scenario where it's very hard for the Republicans to get 7 Democrats to vote for their budget request, which is why I think you're going to basically probably see a continuing resolution.
Talking a little bit more about these political aspirations, because we have our eye out for these 2026 midterm elections. How important is it when it comes to what the GOP in the House and the Senate versus Democrats, what they're going to accomplish in these next few months? How much of an impact is that going to have as to the results we may see come November 2026?
Well, whether you like it or don't like it, the one big beautiful bill is a legislative accomplishment, meaning that it is something that got through the legislative hurdles, and they were able to really get essentially moderate Republicans to vote for the legislation on the left, and some of the more conservative Republicans to vote for the legislation on the right. The problem is, if you look at the polls, it is currently unpopular with the American people. So getting a legislation passed is one thing. What Donald Trump's job and the Republicans' job is to sell it to their constituents. And many Republicans are seeing when they go out to some of these town hall meetings that they're being booed for supporting that legislation. Now, does that mean that that's the majority of their constituents? Maybe, maybe not. It could just be that there's a vociferous group in their congressional districts that are willing to come out for town hall meetings, and they're just essentially taking up the halls, if you will, and that could be what's doing it. But the fact of the matter is that it was something that got passed for the Republican caucus, but now it's a matter of trying to sell it to the American people, and that's very hard in that it is not particularly popular with the general population contemporaneously.
Right. Well, Rich, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of things that we could really, talk about when it comes to this long list as to what Congress is going to be focused on today. But is there anything else that you feel is very important that you need to add before we watch these first sessions going down later?
I think it's just been very interesting to watch how the Democrats deal with Donald Trump. I think that they could essentially play hardball in terms of in terms of the budget. The last time around, you saw 10 Democrats, including Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, Dick Durbin, the minority whip, and some of the former members of leadership, like Gary Peters, who used to chair the Senate Congressional Campaign Committee, voting to keep the government going, voting against the government shutdown. It'll be very interesting to see what happens here. It's something that if Chuck Schumer chooses to run for re-election in 2028, there's always a possibility somebody like AOC challenges him from the left, saying that he is essentially too moderate, and that they really need to draw a line in the sand against Donald Trump. So it'd be very interesting to see some of the politics. Also be very interesting to see if some members like Jeanine Shaheen and Dick Durbin, who both are not running for, not seeking re-election, are kind of decide to bite the bullet and vote against the government shutdown, because they do not have really any sort of a political future, and that they'll be retiring at the end of this term.
All right, so a lot to keep up with is what I'm hearing.
Indeed.
Before I let you go, Rich, I do like to toss out some of these historical questions. You may have heard that Trump has said that he was going to be awarding former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Rich, talk to me a little bit about this medal, what it means, who usually gets it from presidents, and why Giuliani?
Yes, well, I think Rudy Giuliani, in part because he's been such a close ally of Donald Trump, certainly going back to his days as the mayor of New York, going back to his days certainly as an ally in this administration, somebody who was very much an ally going back to the 2016 campaign. I think that Donald Trump tends to award allies. For example, he awarded Jim Jordan, in the House of Representatives, who was very much a vociferous ally of Donald Trump. He was awarded a Presidential Medal of Freedom. In the State of the Union address, actually, back in 2019, Donald Trump had Rush Limbaugh, who was attending the State of the Union address, and he had somebody come over and actually give him the medal. So the president really has a lot of leeway. It's different than, say, a Congressional Gold Medal, which is something that Congress has to authorize and then has to vote for. This is something that the president has almost pretty much plenipotentiary power to do that. There are it's the highest civilian award, so it's not necessarily something like, for example, a Medal of Freedom, a Presidential Medal of Freedom. It's very interesting. There's that Congress can do, and then there's also what the military can do for somebody who's been in the military. But this is something that is basically the highest giving to a civilian. They could have been in the military at some point, but this is something that's giving it to civilians. Sometimes you see a president will posthumously award the medal to somebody, but that's basically what it is.
Rich Rubino, a political analyst and historian. Always good to have you here at LiveNOW from Fox. And like I said, it's Rich Rubino season. We are starting with Congress later on today, so we'll be speaking with you a lot more in the coming days. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
All right, you have a good rest of your day. We're going to step away for a brief commercial break. Before I do so, I do want to put up this post from the White House concerning that last topic that I touched on with Rich here. This is also including a photo of a Truth Social post by President Trump, and it says, quote, "As President of the United States of America, I am pleased to announce that Rudy Giuliani, the greatest mayor in the history of NYC and an equally great American patriot, will receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom, our country's highest civilian honor."